Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh. We're here on Yahweh's Sabbath day. Greetings to those on the internet or those that might be watching live. Today's message is discussing tares inside the body. The Bible talks about, Messiah gave us a parable of the wheat and the tares growing together until the time of the harvest. And I'm going to touch on I went through the scriptures and extracted a lot of different verses on how to handle things inside the body, how to handle things between brothers, and if a person's in the body that is struggling, are they struggling wheat or are they actually a tear in the body? And how we deal with those things. And it's obvious in scripture that things are dealt with in different ways. And so how do we know? How do we know the difference between a tear that's just hanging out or somebody that's actually wheat? How do we know? In Luke chapter 6 and verse 43. For a good tree brings not forth corrupt fruit, neither does a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. For every tree is known by his own fruit. For of thorns men do not gather figs, nor of a bramble bush gather they grapes. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. And the next few verses I think are very interesting, and I think that it ties in with the fruit here. And why do you call me master, master, and don't do the things that I say? Why are you calling me your master, but you're not obeying me? And there's a lot of people out there in the world that think he is the master, but they're not obedient. And obedience is one of the fruits. Whosoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them, I will show you to whom he is like. He is like a man which built a house and digged deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently upon that house and could not shake it, for it was founded upon a rock. Those that hear him and obey him are like a house with a sure foundation. But he that hears it and does it not is like a man without a foundation. Is like a man that without a foundation built a house upon the earth, against which the streams did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell. And the ruin of that house was great. So where does this fruit come from? John chapter 15, verse 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that bears not fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he purges it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now you are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can you, except you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He that abides in me, and I in him, the same brings forth much fruit. You have to abide in the Savior, and he has to abide in you in order to bring forth fruit. So if you don't see the fruit in somebody's life, either they're a newbie, a babe, or there's a disconnect. One of the two. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch and is withered, and men gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burnt. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, You shall ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit. So shall you be my disciples. What does this fruit look like? Galatians chapter 5. We know that when the Spirit comes into a person's life, and we're gonna touch on that a little bit, but all through the scriptures, specifically, especially, the book of Acts, over and over, the Spirit was poured out into people's lives, and there was a dramatic change. If we've got somebody in our ranks that hasn't experienced that dramatic change, that life-changing presence, they're missing something. And we have to be careful about who we associate with. Yes, we want the world and the heathen to come in and to come to know him, and we're called to be a light to the nations, but we have to be very careful. A little leaven leavens the whole lump, meaning it spreads. Evil communications corrupts good manners. That means evil association corrupts good behavior. Galatians chapter 5 verse 16. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. And that's the change. That's what's actually going on. When a person starts being submissive to the Spirit, the works of the flesh are not present. Because the Spirit is working on the conscience, causing them to obey, convicting them of sin. And there's something going on in the mind that's saying something's not right. So if a person doesn't have this, there's a serious disconnect. Something's not right. Because the conversions that we read about in Acts, they weren't, years and years of time passing. This was the Spirit come upon somebody, and in an instant something was changing. Something changed. Now, does that mean they were perfect? No. But the renewal of the mind started by his presence. And we're going to get into that here in a little bit in a minute. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that you cannot do the things that you would. But if you be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law. Why? Because the Spirit would not lead you to transgress the law. Verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of the which I told you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. I can't speak for anybody else, but I know while I was incarcerated and I said I surrender all, everything it just named about the Spirit came upon me. I wasn't educated. I didn't know the Bible, but everything he just named came upon me like that. It was on me, and I wanted something different. And that started a process of renewal. And as the Spirit continued to draw me and I continued to dig in and cooperate the Spirit, the renewal of the mind took place. And that was the evidence. And they that are Messiahs have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. That's the evidence. If you're truly in the Messiah, the process of crucifying that old nature, the flesh, with its affections and lusts is taking place in your life. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another and envying one another. Let's look at an instance in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 where there is a tare hanging out in the congregation. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1. It is reported commonly that there is fornication among you, and such fornication as is not so much as named amongst the Gentiles, that one should have his father's wife. He's saying there's something going on here that's so despicable. The Gentiles don't even do this. You are puffed up and have not rather mourned. You're being prideful or arrogant about this, and it has not made you sorrowful. He that hath done this thing, that he that has done this deed might be taken away from amongst you. For I verily, as absent in body but present in spirit, have judged already, as though I were present, concerning him that has done this deed. In the name of our Master Yeshua Messiah, when you are gathered together, and my spirit with the power of the Master Yeshua Messiah, to deliver such a one unto Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that the spirit may be saved in the day of the Master Yeshua. He's saying, get him out. Let Satan have his way with him, because it's obvious by this action, by this deed, he's not one of us. And he goes on to say in verse 6, your glorying is not good. Know you not that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? The person that is committing this sin inside of your congregation can spread. Purge out therefore the old leaven. That's talking about this person that's living like this. Get him out, that you may be a new lump, as you are unleavened. For even Messiah or Passover is sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with the old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Now, this is obviously referring to the context of keeping the feast. And I firmly believe that he is telling the congregation here to keep the feast, but not to keep it with this person, this immoral brother. And it goes on to talk about other immoral brothers, that they don't need to be keeping this feast with you. But I think we can glean this, to be used on a regular basis, not to have this to continue to go on. In verse 9, I have wrote unto you in an epistle not to keep company with fornicators. Apparently he had wrote previously about this, to not keep company with them, but apparently it wasn't clear. So here he's going to clarify, go a little bit deeper into what he was talking about. He says, not altogether with the fornicators of this world. When I told you not to keep company with fornicators, I was not talking about the fornicators in the world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or idolaters, for then must you needs go out of the world. In order to stay away from the fornicators and the covetous of this world, you would have to leave the world. But now I have written unto you not to keep company if any man is called a brother. That means somebody that is in our ranks who claims to be a brother. If a man is called a brother and he be a fornicator or covetous or idolater or a railer or a drunkard or an extortioner, with such a one don't even eat. Don't even eat with a person that claims to be a brother that's living like this. And quite possibly referring to the bread and the wine, because a person needs to examine themselves before they partake of those emblems. For what have I to do to judge them also that are without? Do not you judge them that are within? But them that are without Elohim judges. Therefore put away from amongst yourselves that wicked person. Get them out of the congregation and let Yahweh judge them. And here, he said to turn these people over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that their spirit might be saved. Let Satan deal with them. Let Yahweh judge them. Let Satan deal with them, and maybe their spirit might be saved. We see another instance of somebody else being turned over to Satan in 1 Timothy and verse 18. 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 18. This I charge I commit unto thee, son Timothy, according to the prophecies which went before on thee, that thou by them mightest war a good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience, which some having put away concerning faith have made shipwreck. Of whom is Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have delivered unto Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Don't know the whole story on this, but apparently Paul had a problem with two guys, and he delivered them to Satan so that they would learn not to blaspheme. Now I'm just going to go through a few verses about how we deal with things in the body in Matthew chapter 18. And verse 15, moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee. This word brother is G80 in your Strong's Concordance. It's a combination of two words, and it literally means from the womb. It could be literal or figurative, or someone who is in your faith, someone who is in the same faith as you. And this word trespass is the same word as missing the mark. It's also, the word used for sin. If your brother shall miss the mark with you or sin against you, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and as a publican. I can't say, as a matter of fact, the exact context of this. My personal opinion is this is a brother in the faith, someone who is, truly walking. If he offends you or sins against you, then in a spirit of meekness, have someone else reason with you, or as a mediator. And if he doesn't listen to the two, then of course present it to the church. And it's always good to get a second, third opinion, and even go to the elders to judge with reason. And I think someone erring, this is someone who is in error from possibly even from the faith. And I think we get another example of that in James chapter 5. And James chapter 5 and verse 19, it starts off talking about brothers, and it's the same Greek word. And it says, brothers, if any of you err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converts the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins. This seems to indicate that somebody in the body has fallen away, and if somebody brings that person back, he has saved his soul from death. And there's a lot of debate about this verse, but I think it ties in really well with Ezekiel, the soul that sins, it shall die. If the wicked forsake their wickedness and walk in righteousness, they have saved their soul. And if the righteous forsake their righteousness and walk in wickedness, they have their righteousness will be forgotten. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, you which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. If someone is overtaken, some who is more spiritually mature needs to strive to restore the one, but be very careful lest you also be tempted. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 11. And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. That word reprove is also to rebuke. Have no fellowship is two Greek words, and it's to participate with, to commune with, to share with. So if someone is living in the unfruitful works of darkness, we're not supposed to have fellowship with them. So that's another verse that we might want to consider with who we're allowing into the fellowship, and what is allowed them to continue in. And this sets the context for Acts chapter 15, which is where we're going to go now. So something amazing is going on in the book of Acts. Those of the nations who were traditionally considered unclean are hearing the word. The Spirit is being poured out on them. Their hearts are being cleansed through faith and through the outpouring of the Spirit. And the religious leaders are in awe at what is going on, and they decide that they want to put a yoke of bondage on the nations coming in. And the yoke of bondage is not obedience. The yoke of bondage is obedience before you can have a relationship. We're going to dig into that now. In verse 1, and certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, except, that word also means unless you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved. When therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other of them should go up to Jerusalem unto the apostles and elders about this question. And this is a very good example of going to those who are more spiritual, more mature, to get their opinion on things, which is wise on any decision that you make inside the body. Verse 3, and being brought on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, declaring the conversion of the Gentiles. This word conversion is referring to when the Spirit came on them. This word is 1994 in your Strong's Concordance, and it means reversion or moral revolution, and it's an instantaneous change that they received when that Spirit came on them. And again, if somebody hasn't experienced this, there is a disconnect. Declaring the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy unto all the brethren. And when they were come to Jerusalem, they were received of the church and of the apostles and elders, and they declared all things that Elohim had done with them. So they're discussing what happened in the previous verses, the hearing of the word, the outpouring of the Spirit, the nations coming to the faith, and they're declaring all of this that just happened to build up to make a decision on what they're about to discuss here in verse 15. Verse 5, but there rose up certain of the sect of the Pharisees which believed. Now, for a while I didn't catch this, but this is actually two groups here. The first group is saying they need to be circumcised before they can be saved, and this group is actually believing Pharisees. They're Pharisees that believe in Yeshua, and they're saying, well, it is needful for them to be circumcised and to keep the law of Moses. Verse 6, and the apostles and elders came together for to consider of this matter. Consider what matter? Do they need to be circumcised before they can be saved? And also, I believe another thing to discuss here is what the believing Pharisees said. Do they need to be circumcised and keep the law of Moses? And the apostles and elders came together to consider of this matter. And when there had been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto them, Men and brethren, you know how that a good while ago Elohim made choice among us that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe. He's talking about that story where he had the vision, and he was commanded to go to Cornelius. That's what he's referring to here. And Elohim, which knows the hearts, bear them witness, giving them the Holy Spirit even as he did unto us. And he put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. So he's saying that the Gentiles heard the words and they received the Spirit just like we did, and there was no difference. Now therefore, why tempt you Elohim to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear? And that's being saved by your works. But we believe that through the grace of the Master Yeshua Messiah, we shall be saved even as they. Then all the multitude kept silent and gave audience to Barnabas and Paul, declaring what miracles and wonders Elohim had wrought amongst the Gentiles by them. And after they had held their peace, James answered, saying, Men and brethren, hearken unto me. Simeon, he's referring to Peter here. Peter has declared how Elohim at the first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And to this agree the words of the prophets, as is written. After this I will return and will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of men might seek after Yahweh, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith Yahweh, who does all these things. So here he's saying this is a fulfillment of prophecy. Known unto Elohim are all his works from the beginning of the world, wherefore my sentence is that we trouble not them which from amongst the Gentiles are turned to Elohim, but that we write unto them that they abstain from the pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and things strangled, and from blood. These things were very prominent during this time period, and he was saying they got to stop doing these things immediately in the congregation. They got to stop. And then the very next verse is an explanation of why these four things need to stop now. For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. That word for in some translations is also because. They need to stop doing these things, these four things immediately, because Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him. Meaning these people that are coming in from the nations, if they're truly going to come in with us, they're going to learn from Moses in the synagogues on the Sabbath day. The things that are detestable, that are an abomination, they got to stop. But we'll give them some grace to learn every Sabbath day. In Jude chapter 1, I thought this was very interesting. I actually just caught this this viewpoint this morning here in the book of Jude. Pretty much the whole chapter in verse 1 is talking about one group of people, but as he's talking about this one group through the chapter, he goes back and talks about other stories and kind of gives them a comparison. I'm going to start in verse 3. Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that you should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saint. I wonder what faith that was that we're supposed to contend for. I don't think it was a new faith. I don't think it was a faith that our Messiah established. I think it was the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was a obedient faith. But anyway, for there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men turning the grace of our Elohim unto lasciviousness, and denying the only Yahweh Elohim and our Master Yeshua Messiah. I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how that Yahweh, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterwards destroyed them that believed not. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. Likewise also, these dreamers defile the flesh, despise dominion, and speak evil of dignities. Now this verse 8 is actually going back and talking about that same group. The same group that has crept in unaware. The ones that crept in unaware. Verse 9, yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, did not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, Yahweh rebuke thee. But these, that same group, but these speak evil of those things which they know not. But what they know naturally as brute beasts, in those things they corrupt themselves. Woe unto them, for they have gone in the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward, and perished in the gainsaying of Korah. Now listen to this same group that he's talking about. These are spots in your feasts of charity, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear. They're sitting down with you at your feast, grubbing out, and they have no reverence. They have no fear. Clouds they are without water, carried about of winds. Trees whose fruit wither without fruit. These are trees without fruit. Twice dead, plucked up by the roots. If they don't have fruit, they're going to be plucked up. Raging waves of the sea, foaming out their own shame. Wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, Yahweh comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all of their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These are murmurers, complainers, walking after their own lusts, and their mouth speaks great swelling words, having men's persons in admiration because of advantage. And all these details about the description of this group, I was just like, wow, when it says they're eating at your feasts and there's spots on your feasts. I thought that was wow. And it says that they crept in. They snuck in unaware. Matthew chapter 12. And I'm going to close out with this section here. There's people that come into the fellowship, and there's some that come in and they want to learn. Let me give you I'm going to give you an illustration from my experience. Everybody knows how I help people. I have some come in, and usually about the first month they're 110%, and the second month some of them are 100%. Third month 80%. Fourth month, where'd he go? Anybody seen him? But you've got some that come in, and you give them a Bible assignment, and at the end of the day you ask them how the assignment went, and they're like, what assignment? But then you have some that come in and they're like, when are we going to fellowship? When are we going to have Bible study? You got something else I can watch? You got another video? Or you say, did you watch the video that I gave you? And they said, no, I watched 3. You got some more? That's the difference. The first person I was talking about, there's a disconnect. Something's not right. And usually it boils down to, have you surrendered your life to the Most High? Because until you surrender, until you say, I surrender all, he's not going to pour out his spirit on you. He wants all of you. If you're going to ride the fence, matter of fact, Revelation says hot or cold, because I will spew you out. I would rather that you were hot or cold, because if you're lukewarm, if you're somewhere in the middle, I will vomit you. So, who do we count as our brothers in this faith? And we've discussed here what the evidence of somebody being in the faith is. And if the fruit isn't there, the only way I can see that is if they're brand new. Brand spanking new babes. But they'll get it if they stick around and they have that hunger. But who did the Messiah consider his brothers? Matthew chapter 12, verse 46. While he yet talked to the people, behold, his mother and his brethren stood without, desiring to speak to him. Then one said unto him, behold, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to speak with thee. But he answered and said unto him that told him, who is my mother? And who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hands toward his disciples, those that followed him and learned from him. Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother. Yeshua described his family as those who were submissive to his Father. Hallelujah.